Welcome to this week's episode of the Wednesday Wisdom Last Night's Game podcast. We have so much to talk to you about today because it's March Madness. And of course, this is a huge game for office pools, for betting, for wasting a lot of time at work while watching basketball. And here to talk all about the madness of March, the NCAA tournament, is the big dance champion himself, Scott. Scott, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me on. Not to brag, I did win the women's tournament last year. So that was an earned title. But yeah, we're here to talk about March Madness. It's the ultimate conversation starter in the office with your friends, with your family, at the water cooler, everywhere, because almost everyone went to college. There's a good chance that one of those people went to a college that is in this tournament. And it's exciting because it's one game and you're out. If you have a bad game, you're done. If you have a great game, you keep going. It's not a 7-game series like professional sports. So that's what makes it madness. Anything can happen throughout the rankings.
Yeah, and I think what's really interesting is there's very few championships chosen by one game. Now, if we equate this to the Super Bowl, right? If you have a bad game in the Super Bowl, we could talk Kansas City Chiefs last year. You have a bad game, you're out, you lose. So this one is the same exact thing. If you have a bad game, you're out. And that's what makes it so exciting. It's come down to buzzer beaters. It's why people's brackets get blown when a 5 beats a 12 or something like that. And that's what makes it so exciting. And so I want to talk a little bit about the overall March Madness, the overall tournament, the reason they call it the big dance. It's 67 games packed into 21 days. And this applies for both the men and the women's tournament. And it's one of the most lucrative events for the NCAA, which is the governing body for college sports. They make about $1.3 billion a year. At least that was 2024. This is a huge event, and we see some big things happening. So talk to me just a little bit about this tournament and what we see ahead and the betting and all the things that are happening.
It's the best 3 weeks of the year during spring. The weather's getting better. People are getting more excited, happier with the sun out. And I think we've seen a shift in the NIL/transfer portal era, which means that players can get paid. They can transfer every year. So there's more parity across the entire tournament than we've ever seen before, meaning the top seeds can lose to the bottom seeds, and it wouldn't be that big of an upset, honestly. So we have both men and women going at the same time, like you mentioned. The women's game is a little bit different. The women's game is 4 quarters, as opposed to where the men's is 2 20-minute halves. And college is the only place where anyone plays 2 20-minute halves, so it really makes no sense why they do it, but they do. So that's kind of the basics of where we're at, and there's just so much other stuff to dive into.
There really is. And I'm going to keep our picking the bracket, and you can give us all the pointers at the end.
Okay.
But I really want to dive into each of these tournaments, right? Let's talk about the women's first. Last year, we saw phenomenal numbers with the women's title game outdrawing the men's title game by 4 million viewers, which is just astronomical. We had, of course, Caitlin Clark in Iowa playing South Carolina. Caitlin Clark, obviously not in the tournament this year, but South Carolina is coming in a number one spot, and they are the defending champions.
Yeah, South Carolina's got a mini dynasty going. They've won 2 of the last 3 championships. They're ranked number 1 seed this year once again. They feel they should have been the overall number 1 seed, which they were not, but it might give them a chip on their shoulder that they may have needed. At some point, you maybe get complacent and just winning and dominating everyone. So we'll have to stay tuned and see. And I think they will be able to build off that momentum they had last year with stars like Caitlin that you mentioned and a lot of other stars throughout the tournament, because a lot of those women have come back to school because they have to. They can't leave to go to the draft. So we've got multiple big names in the women's tournament, more than the men's, I would say, that are more household names just because they've been around longer, and the exposure that they're getting with being on ESPN, with being on ABC, part of that new deal they have, that people are actually able to watch the games.
Well, let's talk. Let's talk about watching the games, right? So we've seen the ratings go up. One of the things that is happening this year, this is the 4th year that women can actually use the term March Madness for their tournament itself. But it's also the first year they're going to get these teams are going to get paid, not the individual players, but the teams will be paid by the NCAA.
Yeah, it's crazy to think that just a few years ago you could not it wasn't known as March Madness for women, which
Mhm.
shows you how far we've come in such a short amount of time, what these women have been able to accomplish on and off the court, to get the notoriety, to be able to use that name, and to finally be paid for the first time. The men had been paid for, or the men's teams had been paid for, I forget the year, like the 80s or so, something like that. And finally, the NCAA is probably one of the more greedy corporations in the world. They don't like giving away money, so they're not going to give it away unless they have to. And they realize that the women are bringing so much money that the schools are starting to get a cut of the action. And each school receives money for making the tournament, advancing further and further. So that'll be big for a lot of these programs to get the funding they need, because a lot of these women's teams are not funded the way the men's are. There's a few that are, but most are not. So that's going to be a massive, massive thing for these schools.
Right. And so men's teams have been paid since 1991.
Mhm.
1982 is when the women's tournament started, and this is the first time they've paid them. So think 1991 till now,
Mhm.
they're paying the men's teams until now. So it's pretty astronomical. And you're seeing these ad sales grow, right? 200% from the year before. We're seeing returning advertisers increase their budgets for 81% from last year. And they have 112 advertisers, including 45 brand new brands. You're looking at hotels, resorts, airlines, coffee, in addition to all the normal things of automotive, finance, pharmaceutical, athletic wear. It's really incredible to see this grow.
It's truly amazing. We're in like a rocket ship going up right now. There's no like, it's not like a roller coaster going up and down. It's just straight up. As we've discussed, women's sports are just ascending like no one could ever believe. And you're seeing these big brands come in, and not just like mom and pop shops. They're big brands. They're giving the female athletes NIL deals. You're going to see a lot of commercials with a lot of these women in the commercials. So they're going to become more household names more than they already are. And it's remarkable to see. And I think you're going to see that side of the tournament's ratings are going to be massive again this year.
I totally agree, and we've talked about this. So if you've been listening to a fan of the podcast for a long
Mhm.
time, obviously we just did a couple podcasts all around the rocket ship that is women's sports. But also we talk a lot about how the WNBA draft rules require these women to
Mhm.
play their 4 seasons. And so, we have South Carolina, UCLA, USC, and Texas as the number one seeds in this tournament. But who are some of those names that we need to pay attention to when watching these games?
Oh, there's a lot, so we'll try to narrow it down as fast as we can.
Yeah.
UCLA, the number one overall seed. They've got Kiki Rice, who was in the documentary with Caitlin Clark last year. If you were able to see that followed them through March Madness. Lauren Betts is another big player you're going to get to know throughout the tournament. South Carolina has, I mean, they're just stacked with number one number one prospects, 5 stars. So the entire team is just loaded. And you're going to notice Dawn Staley.
I
She's
love
been in a
Dawn
lot of
Staley.
commercials. A lot of commercials. I know you've bought some shoes that
She ha
she's put out.
She has a strong shoe game, so you need to with the women's coaches, first of all, always have strong fashion.
Yes.
Dawn Staley's shoe game, Kim Mulkey of LSU's just flamboyant outfits. But I mean, they're coaching in 5-inch heels on the sideline. So let's just leave that there.
Yeah, most people can barely
I can't walk.
even I cannot hand up. I cannot walk in 5-inch heels. Yeah, I mean, as you look at their roster, it's just stacked with number one players, recruits like Chloe Kitts. It's phenomenal to see what she's been able to build down there in Columbia, South Carolina. Then we have USC, which Juju Watkins is one of the bigger names. You're going to see her on a lot of commercials throughout the tournament. She's only a sophomore, so she still has another year to go. So she's going to most likely be in that like Caitlin Clark stratosphere by the time she gets done college. And then we have Texas, huge brand. Like all these schools are big brands. And throughout the year, all these teams ended up beating each other. USC beat UCLA twice. UCLA beat them in the tournament, still got the number one seed. Texas beat South Carolina. South Carolina beat Texas. It was a round robin of who's beating who, but that just shows the talent spread out, even though South Carolina probably has the best roster.
Right. So that means it's really
Mhm.
anybody's game to take. And so it makes this bracket super exciting. And if you want to play the bracket, we have a women's bracket on our
Mhm.
website, lastnightsgame.com, where we're no pressure. We'll give prizes for the last place. We give prizes for first place. We don't care. We just want you to come and enjoy the game. Use the auto draft pick if you want to. I'm here for that.
Absolutely. But if you want to win, you could probably pick your own.
I'd probably pick your own. And one we didn't is not in the number one on teams in the number one seed is
Yes.
Paige Bucher. She's been on UConn. She's a mainstay. She's projected to
Mhm.
be the number one WNBA draft, but she's dealt with some injuries in her career.
Yep, you read my mind. That's where I was going next. They're not a number one seed. I think they're two, and they're probably one of the favorites to win as well. She's been around quite a while, like you said, with injuries. She was the first college basketball athlete to get a Gatorade NIL deal. So she was kind of that first wave. And they made it to the Final Four last year, lost to Iowa. They've had a lot of injuries. They're healthy. UConn basketball is a mainstay. They're one of the schools that probably gets as much funding as the men. So there's a number two seed to watch out for.
Now let's take this over to the men's side. Who are we
Mhm.
watching? There's obviously one big name that everybody's watching for
Mhm.
this tournament.
We'll start there. I think, like we said, the men's side tends to struggle with recognition and with getting that marquee player because most guys, if they're good, they go for the 6 months to play the season and then they go to the NBA or, they transfer, go somewhere else. So we have phenomenal superstar freshman Cooper Flagg at Duke, 7-footer, reclassified to go to Duke. So he should technically still be in high school. But yeah, he's at Duke. He's been his shining star for college basketball. Unfortunately, he did get injured in the ACC tournament with a sprained ankle. So his status is kind of up in the air. He's going to play it to some respects in the first round, but their goals are long term. I think we kind of quoted his coach, John Shire, if he was going to come back for the ACC tournament, he said it just wasn't worth it. Like there's agents, there's parents, there's NBA executives that don't want him to come back too early and, you know, make this ankle injury linger long enough to ruin his pro stock.
Absolutely, because has he declared for the NBA draft yet?
No,
He
but
has. We've heard
you,
both in or out, possibly.
I mean, he rumored he wanted to stay and come back to Duke, but in the long run, you have to go, even if. I mean, I think he's making almost $5 million at Duke, which is probably pretty nice rather than going to the worst team in the NBA. I'll be honest with you. So, I mean, I'm sure it's tempting, but you have to go. You have to get
Finish your
that
year.
process started so you can get to that next contract.
Yeah, I mean, can you imagine?
And
What's he? 18 years old then? Maybe.
maybe barely. Yeah.
Yeah, if he reclassified.
Yeah. And then, I mean, Duke was able to win the ACC tournament without him. So they're pretty stacked. And you either hate Duke or you love Duke, but you're going to tune in to see Duke play. So the longer they're in, the better the ratings will be. More hatred, more love. Either way,
Yeah.
you're going to tune in.
Right. And so we have UConn is the defending men's champion.
Mhm.
They're seeking a three-peat, but they are not in the number one seeds in this. We have Auburn as the overall, Duke, Houston, and Florida, but I don't see UConn in there.
UConn is not. They were one of the reasons that ratings were down for the men's tournament last year because they were so dominant that it wasn't really even a competition for them last year. So that was their second in a row. They had a lot of guys go pro, some transfer guys. So it's kind of a new roster. Danny Hurley's, as we've spoken about before, kind of a psychopath, which is one of the reasons why he is where he is. And he's had a rough year with the media.
Oh, why? Tell me. I don't know this.
He's just a little testy. Obviously, they aren't doing as well as he would hope they would do, and I think maybe to take attention away from the team, like people criticizing his team, he'll go into the media and he likes to spar a little bit with them.
Got
Get
it.
into it a little bit, get
Okay.
into it with some fans. So he's no issue getting into it with people, and I think they're a number 8 seed if I'm not mistaken. But I wouldn't rule out them making a run, but it's certainly not to the level where they were the previous years.
Got it. And, we talked about the sponsors on the women's side. On the men's side, there are 18 NCAA corporate sponsors who have really conspired to make it really hard to come by for new sponsors. And some of those big backers that account for 50% of the advertising on the men's side, AT&T, Capital One, Coca-Cola, Buffalo Wild Wings. Hopefully they have a better Buffalo commercial. Geico, Wendy's, Home Depot, you name it, they're in it.
Mhm.
But it'll be really interesting to watch because it's almost become like the Super Bowl where it become really protective of that bubble of sponsors, those core sponsors. So I think that's going to be really interesting to see just how that continues to go too, right? This is more approachable than Super Bowl, but with just as many eyeballs.
It is, and even if the ratings were down a little bit, the demand for sponsors trying to get in is not down. Like the amount of companies is massive, so there's no drop off there whatsoever.
Yeah. And I want to talk a little bit about teams you might want to cheer for. Like maybe you don't have a dog in the hunt in any of this. And so you have BYU. I love this story. It's one of my favorite. Richie Saunders from BYU. Why do we want to love him?
Well, BYU, they're playing VCU. They are on the first season with a new coach. They've kind of exceeded expectations. And we found out, a little tidbit during one of the games a few weeks ago that announcer dropped the knowledge that one of the players' family members had created the tater tot. And as a fried potato enthusiast yourself, I know that excites you.
Yeah, I mean, Richie Saunders, kudos to your great grandfather for making the tater tot. I mean, it's making school lunches and Sonic meals better all the time.
And it makes growing up UNLV fan, it makes the hatred for BYU a little less, knowing
Yes, that's true.
that without him, we wouldn't have these beautiful little golden potatoes to eat.
A couple others I want to talk about. Talk to me about the Wofford Terriers. I love this because I just finished Running Point with Kate Hudson, and this story is just straight off the show. So talk to me about the Wofford Terriers.
A spoiler alert for some of us who haven't seen that.
Yes.
Okay. Well, first of all, Terriers, very ferocious mascot, as you know. It's tough to beat a terrier in a fight. They're a smaller team, smaller school, so it's fun to root for them. They're going to be playing Tennessee, which is, traditional powerhouse in basketball. We have a guy shooting free throws who's very unconventional, Kyler Filowich. He's been having struggles from the free throw line for a long time. So he has gone to the underhand free throw, or the granny shot, as many people know. So it's very distinguishable who he is. It hasn't necessarily helped his percentage. He's still shooting in the 30s, but in a era where no one's going to do this no matter what, I got to give him credit for trying something.
Yep.
And people know who he is now.
That's
if
true.
He was shooting overhand,
yep,
we might not know him.
So spoiler alert, in Running Point, it actually works and makes him better.
Oh, okay. Well, maybe he'll hit an underhand free throw to beat Tennessee, upset someone.
Maybe. There you go. And those Terriers will reign supreme. Now, talk to me maybe about, before I ask you about how to pick our brackets, is there one more school you want to talk about that will maybe make people want to love and cheer for them?
This isn't even a player. This is a manager, which, could be inspiration to anyone who's not necessarily good at basketball, but wants to be part of the team. And a student manager, McNeese State, which Will Wade is their coach, and he's going up against his former alma mater, Clemson. So there's a little rivalry there. But their student manager, Amir Khan, has been donned the nickname Aura. So on the official team's page, his name is Amir Aura Khan. And it's because he's known for his walkouts with the team. He's got a boombox, and he's rapping word for word in front of the team. And the legend has built over the weeks, and he's become the first student manager with an NIL deal.
No way.
So yeah, he has an NIL deal. I think it's called TickPix, which is a place to buy tickets for games. He's going to have a sponsorship on his boombox walking out. So, I mean, the guy's risen to stardom in just a few weeks. And if they can upset a few teams, the sky's the limit for him.
So is there a specific song, or is it is this like a jukebox opportunity?
I kind of feel old here. I don't necessarily know the song. It's called In and Out by Lude Foe. And quite honest, I don't necessarily know the song, but Amir Aura Khan does. And that's all that matters. And that's why he has an NIL deal and I do not.
That's right. And so I had to look up where McNeese State was. So it's in Lake Charles, Louisiana, in case you're curious.
Okay. Yeah, that's it. That makes sense. Will Wade was at LSU, so he went up the street to McNeese State.
That makes sense.
And now his manager's more popular than any of the players.
Now, give me a couple of pointers when picking my bracket. I think this is a key thing we all need to have pay attention to. And you can pick your bracket. I mean, your chances of you picking your bracket by mascots or colors or however you want, your chances are almost just as good as everybody else's, because a perfect bracket is basically impossible. So give me some pointers that might help me rise to the middle or the top of the pack.
I mean, there's some that are maybe to experienced people may seem, mundane, but maybe to someone who's new. Number 1 seed has only lost to a 16 seed twice in the men's side. On the women's side, number 1, number 2 seeds rarely lose ever. stick with that. That at least gets you a few wins.
And
I mean,
16 seeds is the lowest they get in
yes,
tournament, just so everyone knows. Okay.
yes. Thank you for clarifying that. And then kind of from there, 11, it used to be that a 5 or 12 upsetting a 5 was the number one upset. And it's kind of changed now. We've got the 11 seed over a 6 seed has kind of taken the percentage wise the upsets. So those are two places to look. And we actually this year we have Colorado State, who's a 12 seed, who's favored by 3 points over a 5 seed, which means that the committee didn't necessarily do a very good job seeding teams.
Got it.
So 11 over a 6, 12 over a 5. I mean, if you really want to go for the big one, 13 over a 4 has gained popularity as well. That's up to
High
like
edge.
almost 22%. So if you really want to go bold, go there. But just know most upsets usually happen in the first and second round. And if you really want to win, you're going to have some higher seeds in the final four. Typically, there's going to be two number one seeds,
Okay.
a number 1 through 5, and maybe like a 7 or 8.
Yeah, and on the women's side, if I remember last year, I think it
Mhm.
was all number one teams in the final four. It was darn close. I can't remember exactly, so don't quote me, but it was the women's side was definitely much more skewed.
Yeah, the women's side's a little more chalk, as you would say, which means the favorites win a little bit more just because
Mm,
there's more top end talent at this moment. They're all going to most of the same schools as to where the men, it's just so spread out.
got it.
There's, I don't want to, not to be mean, but there's no dominant men's team really at
Okay.
this moment. So,
And you have
and
dominant women's teams, but there's multiple of them as
yes,
opposed to just one being really the
correct.
yeah, that makes sense. And I love this stat on the men's side. Pick since 2002, with
Mhm.
the exception of two teams, every team that has won has had blue among its primary school colors. So if
Yes.
you're picking by color, blue might be a good option.
It is a good option. And if I can play off that for a moment, one of the teams that won, which was red, which was Louisville, and their coach was Rick Pitino, and he's back. He's got St. John's back in the mix, selling out Madison Square Garden. New York's buzzing with him back. He's got a strong squad, and St. John's does happen to be red. Louisville red, St. John's red. He's done it before with a non-blue team, so that's.
Okay.
I'm not making any picks for anyone else, but I'm just saying that's something to consider.
Okay. And is there anything that you want to leave us with as we wrap this up?
See, there's so much. I'll go 2 points. 2 points. SEC, you're going to hear a lot about them on the men's side. They had 14 teams get in, which is crazy because that's the most teams ever. That's almost, I think only 2 teams didn't make it out of the league.
So that's
So
the
if you're
Southeastern.
yes, so if you didn't make it out of their league, you're not very good. They have teams that probably shouldn't have been in, but they got in. So you're going to hear a lot of South SEC talk,
Okay.
which means they're going to make a ton of money for those schools.
That's true.
And then let's see. Ooh, there's so much. There's a lot of controversy. We'll see how they do. North Carolina should not have made the tournament. They're in the first four. There was a lot of teams that had better resumes. Their athletic director was the head chair of the March Madness committee, and they got put in without really deserving it. There's been a lot of heat on their athletic director, but he says that he had to leave the room whenever they were discussed to get in.
I'm sure he did.
But even if you leave the room, I think there's people on that committee that would probably want to make you happy.
Sure. Well, and North Carolina State is a basketball powerhouse school. And
Mhm.
so that may just be a team that goes on TV that earns a little extra eyeballs.
Exactly. Yeah. So now that they're in, they could go on a run,
One never knows.
and so they can make everyone eat their words.
And really quickly, can you explain what is first four? Or wait, I think they used to be called play-in games, but what's first four?
It's the last since they expanded the tournament to 68 teams. It's the last teams that got in who aren't really supposed to be in, but they got in, and
Okay,
they play Tuesday, Wednesdays in Dayton, Ohio every year for a chance to move on to play in the actual tournament.
got it. Okay,
So it's just a play-in game to get to the tournament, even though they're considered in the tournament.
got it.
And you won't pick those in your bracket
Yeah, don't pick those.
usually.
Yeah. Well, there you have it, and we have wrapped it all up with a bow. Scott wearing his Pac-12 tournament shirt from last year, Pac-12, the
RIP,
conference
now
that
defunct.
was. Yes.
Yes.
So, questions, concerns, hit us up on social media. Of course, play our bracket, lastnightsgame.com. We also have a March Madness guide where you can get a lot of this
Mhm.
in writing if you're one person who likes to read it versus listen to it, or you need a little revamp of what we talked about. So, check it out, lastnightsgame.com. Of course, follow us on social and enjoy March Madness. Scott, thanks for sharing your wisdom.
Thank you. Go pick some winners.